Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's presentation on Wills and Estate Planning. This is the National Foundation for Credit Counseling State-Based Economic Empowerment Series. I want to start by thanking our planning committee, our presenter, our sponsors, and certainly you, our listening audience. My name is Ramon Palmer, and I am the Vice President of Outreach and Inclusion for the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, or as we call it, the NFCC. Before we get started with tonight's presentation, I want to tell you a little bit about our organization. Our mission is to empower our clients to address their financial challenges, to take charge of their futures. We are focused on delivering better financial outcomes. We have close to 300 member offices serving all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico, with over 50 member agencies and over 1,100 certified counselors ready, willing, and able to help. And we help everybody: multicultural communities of color, military families and veterans, small business owners, and student loan borrowers, just to name a few. The areas in which we offer counseling support include general financial counseling, housing counseling, small business coaching. We have student loan counseling and bankruptcy counseling. Now, I'd like to pass the baton to my fellow committee lead, the Associate Pastor, Kevin Murphy. Kevin?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's seminar. My name is Reverend Kevin Murphy, and I serve as Associate Pastor of Illumination at the E9 Tabernacle Baptist Church in Philadelphia, PA. And I bring you greetings tonight on behalf of our Senior Pastor, Reverend Dr. Alan E. Waller. We are excited to be one of the churches partnering with NFCC in this effort to bring financial literacy to underserved communities of color through the churches. We have a financial ministry which works on a consistent basis to make sure our congregation and immediate community are made aware of subject matter related to budgeting, through home ownership, through the importance of credit. But we also wanted to be associated with the NFCC and the other partners that you will be hearing from, because we believe this effort is so very important for us to get financial literacy and this great information through these extremely capable and competent presenters out to everyone that we possibly can. And even right now, if you have a chance to text somebody or to email somebody that you think would benefit from this information, please do so, because it is vital that we have this information. Again, we thank God for you and for your presence tonight. May God continue to bless you. I also will greet you on behalf of Pastor Cedric Jones from the historic Mount Zion Baptist Church of Philadelphia. You will be hearing from him later in this presentation. And on behalf of both of us, again, welcome, and please take full advantage of this information. God bless you, and good night.
Hello, thank you so much. This is Latanya Gonzalez from Freddie Mac. We are so ecstatic to be here tonight. For those of you that don't know, Freddie Mac is a secondary mortgage company that does more than purchase loans from the primary market. We also provide housing insights and solutions, and we've also provided Credit Smart information, a financial literacy capability tool for the last 20 years. We are ecstatic to be on this wealth building journey with you tonight. We're happy for the families that are here tonight, the housing counselors, so that we can work together to decrease the wealth gap by finding out how estate planning will play a role in the legacies of our communities. Thank you so much. Next, I'm going to hand it off to Cora Fulmore, who is our resident guru on credit.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Latanya. I am so excited about being here and to be a part of this partnership with NFCC, Pastor Cedric Jones and Pastor Kevin Murphy and Latanya Gonzalez from Freddie Mac. NFCC has done an excellent job in bringing all of us together, and I think that you're in for a treat to have Ms. Aimee Griffin to be a part of tonight's presentation. So I encourage you to not only reach out to your colleagues and your friends that may find this very interesting for them, to go ahead and join and pass the call-in number and link to them so that they can come into this particular call. But I also encourage you to take notes and be ready to ask questions. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Herman Palmer. And Herman?
Thank you, Cara.
You're welcome.
I'm excited about tonight's presentation because I think it's a very timely subject, wills and estate planning. This seems to be the topic few, if anyone, wants to discuss. But as soon as there's a need, we very often find ourselves either ill-prepared or totally unprepared at a time we can least afford it, a time when we are dealing with loss, and perhaps when we are most vulnerable emotionally. For this reason, it is very important that we take the opportunity to make our wishes known and record them using legal documents. Now, I want to review some of our ground rules. This is a safe space, a space that is provided for all in attendance to get answers to the information they need to have better outcomes. What that means is simply this: there is no judgment. Ask any question you have. Chances are, if it occurred to you, the same thought has also occurred to 3 or 4 others. You tuned in for a reason. Help us help you get the answers to your questions. If you don't ask, we can't answer. There are no dumb questions. There will be a brief survey at the end of this session. Please help us out by responding. We are working to build the best program possible, and we can only do that if you make your opinions or your requests known. If you're interested in learning more about or in joining the Faith-Based Alliance, there will be an opportunity at the end of the presentation to notify us of your interests. And if you're looking to help create better financial outcomes for people or communities, then we'd be glad to speak with you. Now, with all that done, it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's presenter. Aimee Griffin is the principal of the Life and Legacy Counselors of the Griffin Firm, an estate planning firm that seeks to educate and facilitate the creation, protection, and transfer of wealth. The Life and Legacy Counselors stand on the core value of FIRST, F-E-R-S-T, faith, excellence, relationships, service, and trustworthiness. The racial wealth gap continues to grow, and land within the Black community is dissipating with each generation, as only 30% of Black people have an estate plan to strategically grow and pass wealth to the next generation. Creating a legacy through estate planning discusses the strategies and opportunities to build. Aimee's goal is to build strong communities, one family at a time. Her mantra is, "We are better together." It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce the speaker for this evening's Wills and Estate Planning presentation, Ms. Aimee Griffin. Aimee, please inform the people.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity, because again, when we know better, we can do better. So I am excited to share the knowledge that I have, and you don't even have to get the student loan debt that I did. So I am always privileged to share the information. So I always start off with, or I always try to infuse a picture of our team. And because one, I just think we just a powerful good look. But I also think that it's really important that as you select someone to serve you, and yes, that we're mindful of serving you in this way, that you are thoughtful about what it is that you're looking for, how it is you're connecting, making sure that their values are your values. Because what I honestly admit, I have biases about how do we protect, transfer wealth, how do we bridge the racial wealth gap, and all of that is a part of the counsel that I provide. So if we know that someone comes from a different bias, they're not the ones for you. I also point out the fact that this is what we do. Our URL is yourestateplanningatourney.com. And so what we do is when we talk about estate planning, we don't have a huge breadth of services that we provide or practice areas, but we have great depth. So as you identify someone who is you're interested in serving you, make sure that that's a person who has truly a focus that is the focus is estate planning. It's not that I do criminal, personal injury, corporate law, and estate planning. Make sure that the interest that they have is consistent with yours. So that's one of the things that I want to make sure that as you're selecting, make sure you select the one who's going to serve you, that talks to you, that hears you. Right, next. So I am, the next slide, please. Right, so I'm thrilled that we're doing this in Black History Month, but what's really important is as we identify those folks who have huge impact, we look first and foremost, the bottom left is Martin Luther King. What we know is he changed the world. He changed the world. And what is, we don't take lightly the legacy that he created, but also in so doing, he didn't create an estate plan for himself. Unfortunately, he probably didn't think that he had a whole lot to leave because he didn't make a whole lot of money during his lifetime. However, that which he left, the impact that he had, created significant wealth for those people that came behind him. But because of the many conflicts that ensued between his children after he passed away, a lot of that went to lawyers, which, in his case, I'm not so happy about. We have top left, Chadwick Boseman, as well as Aretha Franklin, both knowing that they unfortunately passed away of cancer. So they both knew that they had cancer and they both chose different paths. So Chadwick actually did have an estate plan, but it wasn't a comprehensive plan. And so what you may have heard is that he had to, that his wife had to open an estate, and there was conflicts with his parents of who gets what, where, and how, had to go through the whole probate process, which indeed created costs for the family that shouldn't have. Aretha Franklin handwrote her own wills. Now, with that in mind, I'm not mad at her for doing it. A lot of people want to do it yourself. But what ends up happening in her case is, again, lawyers got paid so much more than they should have because of the conflicts that were a part of the disparate confusion between the different wills. And she had a child who had special needs. Now, prior to my going to law school, I served people with special needs, and that takes a certain level of expertise as well. And so she didn't make that plan. She didn't have a plan, as well as she had identified her niece as the executor or personal representative, and she ended up resigning because of the conflicts that were created. And so it's not just enough to have a will, but have a will that is well drafted. So so sometimes we think that, oh, I can do this, is not the big thing, or I don't have that much. We don't really know what we have. We don't know what we'll have when it comes to that time. We need to move beyond our survival thinking and build on our thriving thinking. Next slide, please. One of the things that I'm proud about is the creation of what we know as what we created as the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals. And I'm excited about the opportunity to align with NFCC Faith-Based Alliance, because we know that the mission of the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals is to bridge the racial wealth gap. With 30% of Black people having an estate plan, that means so much of our assets are lost through the probate process. That so much of our assets is lost because we didn't have a plan, and we allowed someone else to determine what's going to happen for us or for the people that we care about. And so I encourage you to think about, really, do you want that to happen for you? So we are moving to the next slide. The collaborative principles of the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals is by bridging all of our 15 strategic partners together. And the reason why that's important, again, is because we're better together. As Herman said, I love to say is, we operate so often in silos. I say Black folks are great at creating a movement. Let's create a movement of coming together so that we can strategically build, protect, and transfer wealth. Next slide. So I'm showing, the next slide is identifying my legacy, what's important to me. While I took this picture before I realized, okay, I'm married now, but my legacy is in my children and my children's children. Scripture said a good person leaves an inheritance for your children's children. It is not okay just to stop at our children. And I also say that it means it's not just about our biological children. Our impact should be about the children that we have biologically, as well as spiritually, as well as communally. That's our responsibility. So if indeed just being a good person that leaves an inheritance for your children's children. So we have the responsibility to create far more than we, than we have been if we just let it happen by default. And so what we know is Habakkuk 2:2 says, write the vision and make it plain, so upon tablets, so those who can read it can run with it. And I say that is a double whammy. We're supposed to have a vision first and foremost. Have a vision, and that vision is supposed to be something that goes beyond us. So we're supposed to, so someone who's supposed to come beyond us and make it and run with it. It's not supposed to be a vision that we can have and handle all by ourselves. That's not what the expectation is. Next slide, please. So when we look at estate planning, it is what I like to sort of draw it in a circle to be thinking about how it is a comprehensive look at the work that we do, the life that we live, bringing in not just our life insurance, our living will, but we should be being thoughtful about how do we plan our property disposition, and we should plan it in a way that is impactful. But I know that most of us, because it's a faith-based group, that we tithe. If we don't tithe, if we don't write an estate plan, we can't give to our church when we pass away. We can't have that impact for our charitable purposes. And I know most of us have it, even if it's just for tax mitigation purposes. We should strategically build it. But there is the estate planning is comprehensive and looking at how do we want to plan for the people that we care about, plan for the life that we have. So even during our incapacity, how do we make it so that our folks are not at each other? Because I can tell you stories. So I'm a professional pessimist because nobody calls me to tell me they're having the best day ever. They're called me to tell me about what's gone awry. And so with that in mind, we get to plan and protect accordingly. Next slide, please. Okay, whoops, you went too far. Okay, all right. So when we think about the pyramid, everybody has a pyramid, Maslow's hierarchy of needs kinds of thing. But when we think about our legacy planning, first and foremost, we think about, am I okay? How do I plan for me and the God bless four and our four, or God bless us four and no more plan? But principally identifying what is it that we are planning for ourselves that we want to make sure everybody's okay. I'm okay. The next level is my family okay? And I think about that family going beyond not just me and my children, but my children's children as well. We need to incorporate our succession planning, business succession planning, as well as our strategic building for our stuff to make sure that we don't pay more taxes than we need to. I say, folks, all the time that God's still working on me. I'm not trying to pay any extra taxes ever. But then when we really are self-actualizing, when we're really trying to get it together, we know that it's not just about us. We need to be able to give back and strategically build. And so when we're planning for our true estate planning, we're able to give back in a way that is impacting not just us, not just our kids, but our community as well. I say all the time, strong families make strong communities. Let's build it together. The next slide. The next slide talks about the impact. If we are transformational, right? And I just identified DC, LA, and Philly, right? So if we identified the impact of the transformation, if we move, again, Black families, there are 30% that have an estate plan. If we just simply inverted that to 70%, so only 30% did not, this is the legacy impact. We'll just say, let's say in Philly, 2,000 families. And if we use the median home value in Philly of 183.2, the legacy impact with the 40% increase is $366 million impacting the community, right? So we can be thoughtful about how do we be transformative? What is it that we can do? And it doesn't take much. And it's simply, in my mind's eye, one of the things that I am focused on is how do we preserve our home? How do we preserve our real property? Because in the Black community, that's 57% of our net worth. But if we don't make a plan, so often we lose it. What we do know is that statistically, our property is lost. We have less property as a Black community than we did. Excuse me. And we did. So we're continuing to lose. So if we are thoughtful about how do we build and protect that wealth, we worked so hard at getting it. Let's retain it for our community and for our children. Next slide, please. All right. So again, impacting multiple generations to build wealth. Planning ahead is a measure of class. What we know is if we're living paycheck to paycheck, we are not able to be thoughtful. But if we are planning from generation to generation to generation, we should all be thinking about how do I make it such that my grandchildren's lives are greater, that they have a greater opportunity, that they have the tools. I'm not saying that we should create entitled trust fund babies that don't do anything, but we should create the opportunity for them to have the resources and the tools so that they can build the life that we want for them to have. They should not, we should not be starting over with each generation. Unfortunately, so many times we see not just people starting over, starting at zero, but starting from negative numbers because they've the work that they have to do to position people. When we have to do a GoFundMe to raise money for to have someone buried, then we're losing. We're not even at the zero. Right. Next slide. So foundationally, the fundamental stuff what everybody should have at the age of 18. 18. Yes, 18. So the first and foremost is that durable power of attorney. That gives somebody capacity to act on your behalf for financial matters. That's valid up until the date of your death or until you change it, right? The second is the healthcare packet. And in my firm, we have 4 parts to that. That's a healthcare proxy that determines who speaks for you when you can't speak for yourself. The advanced directive living will. It means what do you want them to say? Because that's really what's important. We don't want them to impose or have the God syndrome so they can decide when your life should end. But the HIPAA waiver. So often we know that there are people that we want informed. We don't want them to make decisions, but we want them to be informed about what's going on. Sometimes, sometimes it's just our doctor, but we want our loved ones to be able to look at our medical records to know what the status is. And then fourthly, the end of life celebration. I had a mom who called me up to say that she wanted to sue her son-in-law because he burned up her baby, is what she put it. When the truth of the matter is her daughter was cremated, but he was quite distressed about it. I tell folks greed and grief are 2 of the things that we need to guard against when we're doing the estate plan. So if we are thoughtful and build out and provide as much information so we can create a peaceful opportunity for people to walk through this time. Now, the last will and testament. Now, I think TV has jacked us up by creating this illusion that you have to just do a reading of the will. People call me all the time and say, will we do a reading of the will? And I will say, absolutely. But my reading and your reading is absolutely no different. There is no benefit for me reading the will to someone because that does not have an impact. What has an impact is when you go through the court system. The last will and testament is directed by the court probate process. And especially in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, it's quite arduous in that there are significant taxes. Inheritance taxes. But the first and foremost process is that it denies access to your loved ones to the assets right away. But the greatest thing about that last will and testament is it identifies for those people with minor children, who's going to be the guardian, right? And so we identify what's the best interest, how do we strategically plan, how do we build? But we got to have all this stuff written out. We can't just let the first person volunteer to be that guardian. Next slide, please. So who will handle your finances when you're not able to? I've had a number of folks identify, well, let me have my firstborn, my oldest child, Pookie's the oldest son. So he gonna be the one who gonna be my power of attorney. No. I don't know if y'all remember Pookie from New Jack City, but no. The person who should manage your finances when you're unable to is someone who's shown you that they're able to manage their finances when you don't need them to. They ought not be the one who has said, let me borrow a little bit of something because I need to get by. No, we need to have someone who has financial capacity as well as integrity. We need to identify that person because you never know when you're going to need it. We also want to have a backup to that person and sometimes a backup to that backup. Sometimes we put a checks and balance in place to make sure that sometimes that the decisions of making may be too overbearing for them, or it may be at a certain level where we don't really want to have them overwhelmed or tempted. So I always say that what if I have 2 amazing children, and if my son was my power of attorney, if he said, okay, I'm gonna take mommy to the doctor, and so I need to get a Tesla to do it. No, So we need to be thinking about how do we balance the checks and balances in place? How do we make sure that my daughter doesn't feel like my son is spending up her inheritance? How do we balance that out? Because I really am thoughtful about how do we preserve relationships in addition to all of that. Next slide, please. In addition, who's going to make decisions about your health care? I identified John Pierre Adams, who was a young soccer player, and he needed to have a knee replacement surgery. Unfortunately, he had medical malpractice where the anesthesiologist made a mistake, and he ended up being in a coma for 39 years, at which point he passed away. His wife cared for him within that coma for 39 years. I don't know that he would have made that choice, but because it wasn't written, that was the choice that was made for him. Terry Shiva was a young lady in Florida. Her mom, she had an accident and she was in a persistent vegetative state. And her mom said she wanted her to live no matter what. And so they were tube feeding her because she could not eat on her own. She could breathe on her own, but she could not eat or drink on her own. Her husband said she would not want to live that way. And her mother said she would want to live anyway. So they had a 15-year court battle that was decided by the Florida Supreme Court. And with that, it was resolved that she would not choose to live that way based on the evidence that was presented. But I say to you that her husband and her mom were both grieving. And so, unfortunately, the court made the decision. And so I I presume that they were both in distress, that they were both unable to really sort of go to the people who, the two people who loved her the most, weren't able to find comfort in one another because they were at odds. If she had written out what she would wanted, they could have grieved together. They could have been comforting together, but they didn't have that benefit because they didn't know what she wanted. Next slide, please. Probate. When you don't have a will, you allow the government to determine who gets your assets. Now, there is a formula, and each state, each jurisdiction may have slightly different formulas. I've had people say to me all the time, oh, well, my spouse will get it all. No, that's not how it goes. The spouse does not get it all. Your spouse gets a percentage of your assets, and your children will get a percentage. If you don't have children, then your parents get the percentage. So I encourage people to be thinking about, do you want that to happen? Do you want the formula to be applied? What I do know is that our families are typically atypical. It's not the standard. We often have grandchildren who are not typically adopted. We may have a husband who ain't really a husband, or a husband who shouldn't be our husband anymore. So we need to be planning for, what does that look like? We want to make sure that, I had a circumstance when a wife lost her husband, but then she ended up losing her house as well because the son got a portion of that property. So we get to think about ahead of time, what do we want? How do we plan for it together and make sure that we have that consideration in place for our family members, for the people that we love? Sometimes it's not the biological relatives at all. It's not our next of kin as the government would identify. Next slide, please. Actually, and I didn't mention that the process of the probate is pretty significant as well. When you passed away and you have a will, or if you don't have a will, what happens is that the court will say, okay, you bring your will to the court, or not a will, but you also bring what's called a petition to the court that says, Aimee died, and we want to appoint Joseph to serve as the executor. They'll put a notice in the paper, and I'll use Maryland. They'll put a notice in the paper that for 3 weeks that said Aimee died. Does she owe you any money? And you have this time frame to come forward to say she owes you money. And so, as we therefore can't do anything until we wait until the creditors come forward, Sears and Roebuck, American Express, student loans, that hospital bill because I was sick before I passed away. They come forward to say, yeah, Aimee owed me money. Then the next step is that creditor needs to be satisfied before my loved ones get those assets. So if I only have a house, my house would need to be sold to satisfy the creditors. And then what's left goes to my loved ones. So that's one of the things that I always encourage people to avoid the probate process for. The other part, which I think is one of the greatest governmental scams ever, is that when you when they take my petition to the court, they say, okay, how many assets does she have? What is the value of Aimee's assets? And so I'm going to use the numbers that I just remembered. So let's say I have $499,000 worth of assets. In Maryland, that's $575 paid to the court. Then the more I have, the more is paid to the court. So we get to be thoughtful about, do I want to pay the court based on my assets that go through the probate process, or do I want to avoid probate so that they don't have to have a say in it, right? Then my creditors just get a deceased notice on my bill, on my Sears Roebuck charge, and my student loans, my credit, that bill goes into the casket with me. Because we get to avoid probate. It's only those assets that go through the probate process are satisfied with, do we satisfy the debts with, their creditors with. So I encourage people to avoid probate by, one, having beneficiaries on all of your accounts. If it doesn't go through probate, it doesn't have to satisfy those claims. As well as for your real property, we can do a life estate deed, which means I continue to own it during my lifetime. And when I pass away, it goes to my loved ones, or a transfer on death deed. And again, that depends on the jurisdiction where you are living. So if you have property, real property in multiple jurisdictions, you've got to probate in multiple jurisdictions. You have to do it in the state where you live, as well as the state where each state where you have real property. So I encourage people to be thinking about, no, we want to avoid that every which way, because we want to make sure that those assets pass on to our kids and our kids' kids. Next slide, please.
Aimee, before you go on, I do have a question.
Yes.
What are the steps to assign a person to be in charge of your finances in case you are incapacitated? And does this person supersede the durable power of attorney in making these decisions?
So I think I heard you say, what is the possibilities, or what is the steps to have someone manage
to assign a person to be in charge of your finances in case you're incapacitated?
That's the durable power of attorney. That is the step. Okay.
And then does it, and this person supersede the durable? It is it's the same thing.
It is the power of attorney. Exactly.
We got another one. Hold on.
Okay.
Does an estate eliminate the need to go through probate?
No. The will directs the probate process. But again, it's only those assets that you have that are titled in your name, solely in your name when you pass away.
Okay. All right. There was some funkiness. Let me just see something here. All right. I think that's it for now.
Okay. So if you don't have a power of attorney, and you are no longer capable of making decisions for yourself, then there's a court involvement, and it's called guardianship. And it's a court-directed process where your loved one would have, if it's your loved one who can qualify to serve as your guardian, they need to have a bond, which means they have to have good credit. They have to be able to pass a criminal background check, which, many folks do, but there are some folks who have had a bit of a past or a financial decision. And then with that, a court-directed guardian a court-appointed guardian can be the person who serves. And why that is typically okay, but many times that is an attorney. And then you're paying for the hourly rate of the attorney to manage your financial affairs. And so a lot of times, many times, that decision is made by someone who does not love you. There is an extreme example on a Netflix movie called I Care a Lot, about an attorney who was appointed. And it's typically not scandalous. But I give an example all the time. One of the petitions, fee petitions for a guardian that I reviewed was an hour for the attorney to go to the bank, an hour for attorney to be at the bank to open an account for the guardian, and the third one is for an hour for them to come back home. That's 3 hours. Go back to the office. That's 3 hours, and the attorney's rate was $400 an hour. So that was $1,200 to pay the attorney to open a bank account. That's not anything else but to open a bank account. So and that oftentimes for expediency's sake, they will just sell a property as opposed to preserving it for the next generation. So I encourage people to be thinking, how do we make sure that our loved ones are the ones who represent us? Okay. Next slide, please. So if you want to go beyond the foundation, right? If you want to be beyond the foundation, which include the power of attorney, the healthcare packet, and the last will and testament. The first and foremost where I recommend, because our children are indeed the most important reasons for anything, is that the standby guardianship designation. We should have a designation that identifies who would temporarily have the authority to act and care for our children if we are unable to. We had, so often the court takes months to identify somebody. And we've had situations where we've had people unable to get children into school and because of the not having the court directed process in motion. And we also need to know that we don't want the first person to volunteers to take our children. That creepy Uncle Jimmy isn't necessarily the one that we want. So I encourage people to identify who is it that they want to take care of their children. The second thing we talk about is there are two categories of trust. Categories, not two types of trust, but categories of trust. The revocable living trust or revocable living trust. For when I'm talking to finance people, it's revocable. And that is a trust that makes decisions. I mean, that is an extension of you. Now, let's say it's my trust. I get to create rules on how my assets can be distributed. It's the rule book. And I always say, give your money an assignment, a plan, an action plan. Excuse me. So making sure that it's not just that I am planning for my children and my children's children to have a good time based on the work that I did, but making sure that they have the rules and the strategy to be successful. What I say all the time in my trust, my trust does not allow the purchase of depreciating assets, right? So you get to create the rules to manage your assets. The greatest thing about the revocable trust is that it provides privacy, unlike the will. The will it's public. Anybody, anywhere can go down to the Register of Wills after you've passed away and look at your will. What we know is there are people, as well as the probate process, there are people in every probate court that just stand there and read the petitions that are filed so they can see who passed away and what houses are potentially going to be available to them. And we see that in every court process that we have, a court office that we have. So I encourage people to protect their loved ones because these folks are out there trying to prey on them. Now, a revocable trust is an extension of me, uses my social security number as an identifier, and so I can make the changes every other day. Everything that's in the revocable trust is a part of my estate, right? But there's no creditor protection. Then the second category of the trust is an irrevocable trust. That means it's a lot like a corporation or a limited liability company, and it has its own EIN. It's what we call an asset protection trust. As such, we create some limitations on accessibility because it's separated from you. So if someone were to sue you, it would not have access to the assets in the irrevocable trust. Or if someone were to sue an asset in the irrevocable trust, they don't have access to your principal assets, your primary personal assets, right? So we use the irrevocable trust a lot of times when people have assets that exceed the estate tax exemption limit. excuse me, we
this is
also use an
Latanya.
irrevocable trust when we are planning for Medicaid, because sometimes we're able to put assets in the irrevocable trust and then it doesn't count against them, right? And then the business succession planning is another thing that we need to be thinking about, because you need to have a business succession plan just like you have a personal succession plan.
Amy, can I ask you a quick question? It's Latanya.
Absolutely.
Is there a certain net worth where I should be considering this revocable living trust, or is that an individual decision?
So no, it's definitely an individual decision. It's and what we think about as we think about the revocable trust, I think about every person who has a minor child should have a revocable trust, because what we know is if something were to happen to us when we passed away, they get everything when we're 18 if we don't have a plan, right? But also if we're thinking about how do we plan accordingly, plan for our future, we want to make sure we have rules for that. And secondarily, we want to avoid probate. And we want to maintain privacy. So those are the factors that we want to consider. It's not a matter of how much do we have. It's what we want as values, what we want to achieve. And so often people get hung up with, okay, no, I don't have enough. I say to you, it's not about the amount, it's about what you're trying to achieve. So that's part of the conversation. If we're trying to maintain privacy, if we're trying to avoid probate, that's the way to do it.
Pardon me, Amy, we have a question from an online attendee. How often should a will be updated?
So I am one of these people, most often the correct answer, people say, oh, every few years. Now, I don't know about y'all, but as I have grown up, time is flying by. And so what we thought was just a few years turned out to be many years. So what we've incorporated in our practice is that you should have a planiversary touch base. You should annually look at your stuff to see, do you still like the people that you liked? Do you still have the stuff that you have? Because what we know is as the laws change, as your assets change, as the people in your life change, you need to be thinking about what changes do I need to make in my estate plan?
Thank you.
Certainly. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So when you think about it, part of it is I always get excited about thinking about how do we think about this in a comprehensive perspective. Because let's say we have an amazing couple who have 2 children, right? And it's great that they have 2 children, but let's say they have, they have one house. How do they divide it among their 2 children? That's one thing. And then what we know, especially with Black families and heir property. So those 2 children one has 3 children and one has 2 children. So now we have 5 people who have interest in a property. And so as we continue to grow our families, what we know is if we don't have a strategic plan, we tend to lose our properties. We look at heir property, it's huge discussion in the Black community. That's how we lose so much of our property. How do I make sure that my loved ones do not lose out because I didn't make a plan? So one of the typical ways that we plan for our estates is by what I call the decentralization, making sure that we separate. So, okay, if I have $1 million and I have 2 kids, they each get $500,000. If they have, I shouldn't have done that number, but because of my math. But so then if one has 2 kids, so they get $250,000, and the child who has 3 kids gets $166,000, I think. So pray for me because my math I'm a lawyer. So, but what we know is as we tend to roll it out this way, it's the dissemination and the decentralization and the diminution of our assets. If we think of it that way, if we go with the traditional strategic way, the typical estate planning way, but we can think about other ways to do that. Next slide, please. All right, so we can be planning for how do we make sure that we have assets that continue to grow instead of be diminished. One of which is like there's a book out, What Doing with the Rockefellers, or the Rockefellers Plan, or something like that. And what they know is while they made their money initially through oil, one of the things that they continue to do is planning for the multiple generations and making sure that our children and our children's children had assets, and that our net worth continue to grow. For example, with each of our, I say to grandparents all the time, with each grandchild, when they are born, get them a whole life insurance policy, right? And put it in a trust. So when my grandchildren were born, because it's, life insurance is priced on age and health. And during that first 6 months, they're the cheapest, it'll be the cheapest they'll ever be. And so if I get $1 million life insurance policy on my grandchild, and I'm going to use math to make my life easy, they borrow $250,000 for college. They don't pay it back. Let's be clear. There's no expectation, no desire for them to pay it back. Then let's say they borrow $100,000 for a down payment for the house. Right now, they still have to get a mortgage. They have to still provide, pay that mortgage. They have to be qualified for a mortgage and maintain it. But when they can borrow money for other stuff too. But let's say they borrowed $500,000. When they pass away, oh wait, I forgot to mention too that it's because it's in my trust. That life insurance policy does not show on their FAFSA when they are applying for college, right? It doesn't show up in their financial aid application. That's one thing. So, but when they pass away in 400 years, for you people who are sentimental, right? That 500,000 goes back into the trust for the next generation, right? So we can continue to be planning about multi-generational wealth building. So. And then, of course, that doesn't, again, creditors don't get to touch that stuff. We get to build accordingly.
So, got a question. It popped up. They want to know, can you just one more time review the difference between a revocable and irrevocable trust? And then, can you also give a few pros and cons for each?
Okay. For a revocable trust is an extension of you using your social security number, right? And so the pros for that is avoids probate. The pros for both of these avoids probate and it's private, number one. But the pro for the revocable trust is that you get to do legacy building for multiple generations. You get to say, my grandchildren are able to plan. We get to have college for them. We get to create rules for them. We get to build legacy. In addition, one of the things that I say that if I have one house and 2 kids, right? In my case, is 1 house and 3 kids. So I don't want to give them a half a house, but I give them I convert my house to an income producing property that they can get benefits from. Each of them can get benefits from, right? And so, as again, I say all the time, real property appreciates, money evaporates. So that's that's part of the benefits for the revocable trust, that you can make money go further, and it can support multiple children on something like a house, right? Actually, that works for both. But the revocable trust, again, is an extension of me, and I can make. What I love about it is that I can make changes every other day, and I get to remind my children that I get to make changes every other day, so they treat me really, really well. But the con of the revocable trust is that if someone were to sue me, they would have access to the assets in the revocable trust because it's an extension of me. It uses my social security number, and there's no separated until I die when that revocable trust becomes irrevocable. An irrevocable trust, the great thing about that is that what has all of the benefits, the privacy, the avoiding probate, as the revocable trust. The greater piece of the irrevocable trust is that it is not counted in your estate. So if I have $10 million in the irrevocable trust, it's not impacted on estate taxes, right? And the estate tax, depending on your jurisdiction, is anything above, and I'll just stick with federal for right now, that the federal estate tax is in 2025 will be $5 million. In 2023, it's $12 million, but it's going to come down to $5 million. And if you have assets that exceed the estate tax exemption limit, it's hear me, 40% tax rate. right? And it's a flat rate. So I encourage people to avoid it. But one of the great things about the irrevocable living trust is that it's not impacted by estate taxes because it's a separated from you. Number two, it doesn't count as you. And so one of the ways in which that we use that irrevocable trust, again, is if we have assets that exceed the estate tax limit, we put them in there. If we're planning for Medicaid, we put the assets in the irrevocable living trust so that it doesn't count and no one knows that it is that it's yours. So it doesn't, you know, you don't have to, they always say, spend it down, spend it down, spend it down, as well as this, the state can't take your house for the Medicaid planning. So those are the reasons why, those are the distinctions between the revocable trust and the irrevocable trust.
Aimee, you can have both, right? You can put some things
You
in one
absolutely
trust
can have
and
both.
some things that are for different reasons.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so I encourage people to be very thoughtful about tax planning. Again, it's not what you make, it's what you keep. Now, I encourage people to be thinking about how do we plan for estate taxes as well as inheritance taxes. One of the things that I always talk about for people in, I think in Pennsylvania, there's an inheritance tax. Maryland, there's inheritance tax. So we need to be thinking about what it is that we need to avoid. As the scripture says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. But we need to be thoughtful about how do we avoid and minimize it. I'm not saying don't do. I can't remember. Somebody just went to jail recently for it. But we're gonna do it all legally. Make sure we pay that which we have to pay, but not more than that, right? So next slide, please. And real property is one of the things that, again, I always try to encourage people to be thinking about how do we preserve and protect? Because one of the things that we know is, it's, as I've mentioned previously, is, and typically in the Black community, 57% of our net worth has to do with our real property. So we need to protect it. So for the long, you know, for multiple generations, so many times that people can pull the equity out of their property to do things that they need to buy other property. Sometimes we've had people do, right? So one of the things that I encourage people to hear me say, it is in most cases, 97% of the time, I'll say, do not put your children's name on your deed. A lot of times people do that to avoid probate for their children. I mean, yeah, for their children in their houses. And so they'll put their kid's name on their deed. And the reason why I tell people not to do that is based typically around the capital gains. Now, the difference in what you buy your house for and what you sell it for is a capital gain, right? So I'm going to use my former next door neighbor to talk about the example, right? And so he bought their house for $17,000. And this is in DC. The house is now worth $717,000. If he were to sell the property, it would be $700,000 in capital gains tax, right? And then each capital gains tax is different. There's some federal stuff, but it's about 27%, right? So if indeed you put your kid's name on it, they'd have to pay tax on that $700,000. However, if you don't put your kid's name on it and you transfer it after you've passed away through a transfer on death deed or through a trust or even through the probate process, then they get what's called a step up in tax basis. That's as if they bought the property for the fair market value that was identified when you sold it at that time. So I encourage people to do not put your kid's name on your deed in most cases. There are rare examples when I want you to do that and that I advise it. But again, it is one of those things where it's very specific when it makes the most sense. And then JTROS, here's a question. Joint tenancy.
Here's a question. So
go ahead.
My spouse, oh man, hold on. My spouse has a property with a loan in his name only. His brother is on the deed. Would I have any interest in this property if my husband dies?
So, but I have to ask that next question is your husband's name on the deed with his brother? If his name is on the deed with his brother, then it's called tenants in common. So that 50% of that property is, if it's a 50-50 ownership, 50% would be for his spouse and 50% would be for the brother would get to keep it, right? I shouldn't say that. I didn't mean it that way. 50% would be in his estate. Now, again, as I said, if there is no will, that is a portion goes to the spouse and portion goes to the kids. So it gets, you can have a right to it, but only based on what the will is or what the jurisdictional allocation is. Right. If your husband's name is not on the deed at all, he's just paying for his brother to have a property.
Ooh.
Okay, so there, as I just in that last example, we talked about tenants in common. Alternatively, one of the ways in which people own property is joint tenancy with right of survivorship. I call that the last man standing law. That means that, my husband and I can own a property. He dies first, it's all mine. I die first, it's all his. Now, that's really good typically. That can be good typically if we don't have a blended family. However, I share with people, I'm third generation blended family. My grandmother married Mr. Wilcox, and they had 3 children. Then Mr. Wilcox passed away, God rest his soul, and she married Grandpa Griffin and had 13, yes, 13 more children. Obviously, Grandma Griffin died first because she was tired. And then all of their joint assets, now let me be clear, it wasn't a whole lot of assets, but what they had was a house that passed to Grandpa Griffin. And when Grandpa Griffin passed away, it went to his 13 children. Now, again, a house in Springfield, Massachusetts, divided 13 ways isn't all that, but it's the principle that my aunts and uncles who had been raised like, my grandfather's children were disinherited unintentionally. So I encourage people to be thinking about what is the impact that it has on the people. Now, I always encourage people to be thinking about how do we respect and honor the relationships so that we are making sure that we're making good decisions. The other thing that we talk about is reverse mortgages. I always encourage people to be thoughtful. There are times when we have a reverse mortgage, and I'm not, going to condemn or condone it. I typically try to advise against it, if, again, depending on the circumstance and the situation. But if there is a reverse mortgage, planning for what happens and informing people who live with you what's going to happen to the house. Typically, the house that if there's a reverse mortgage, the house would need to be sold if there's not able to refinance the house, because many times the house is underwater, which means that it has a greater debt than value. So I encourage people to, one, be honest with your loved ones about that real property so that they can plan for it. And the other thing that I encourage people to be thinking about in many ways, shape, or form is thoughtful about charitable giving, especially with our real property. I've had a number of folks who are willing to say, okay, I don't know what's going to happen to my property. I don't want to just let it go, and I just don't want it to be sold, but I want to give it to my charitable organization. So I encourage people to be thinking about how can we best impact our community? Because again, they're not making any more land. So with that in mind, let's build accordingly. Let's build our community, our assets accordingly. Next slide, please. So business planning, making sure that you have a business plan that the succession plan that is thoughtful. Unfortunately, far too many times we are creating a business because we need the business, right? We need a job, but we want to make sure that what we pass down to our loved ones really is something that we can pass on. Unfortunately, many times we just go into that survival mode. I had recommended to a physician to make sure that we structure the plan accordingly, this business accordingly, but he didn't want to make those changes because he said, no, it's just about me. However, as he grew the business, his son became a physician and became a part of it. And when he passed away, because he had structured it in a way that was a solo practice, what happened was that it was unfortunately had to be liquidated and start all over again. So I encourage people to be thinking about your beginning at the end in mind. Next slide, please. And so knowing that the structure that you have is really important. And sometimes we create the business, but we can make the shift changes accordingly to make sure that we have the best outcome possible. And then thirdly, the next screen, next slide, please, is we talk about the 5 Ds of business succession planning: disability, divorce, departure, dissolution, and death. We need to strategically build an action plan in each of those circumstances, situations, so that we can make sure that the business that we hand off, the asset that we build, the legacy that we're creating has a capacity to be an asset to the next generation. Next slide. I think this is it, right? Right. And so again, one of the things that I'm thrilled about, again, is the opportunity to provide information and support. So I see that there is a PDF that we're downloading, right? But in any case, you can also, if you want to have follow-up conversations with us, you can go to our website at yourestateplanningattorney.com. I'm not sure if that's a live link or not onto the estate planning information sheet.
I will be dropping the link in order to download that PDF into the Q&A section for those attending online. Those calling in for audio, please follow up with Hermond for this estate planning information sheet from Aimee. Thank you.
And I'm Hermond. So if you want to get access to it, you can shoot me an email at hpalmer@nfcc.org. Again, that's hpalmer@nfcc.org.
So are there any more questions? No more questions? Was this
Oh,
helpful?
no. We got questions. I've been polite, but we got questions. Let's see. If there is one family member paying taxes on a family-owned property, does that person pay? Uh-oh, it kind of went away. Eric, did you bring that
was
one
me.
back?
Go to the publish section. Pardon me.
Okay, all right.
Publish tab, and it's right there so that the attendees
here we
can see
go.
as well.
It's the gremlins. If there is one family member paying taxes on a family-owned property, does that person paying the taxes have the authority to delineate the percentage that the other family members will receive if the property is sold?
Nope. But what they can do is claim to get their money back.
All right, let's see. We got some other questions. Well, I got this one because I talk so much. Can you talk about the Paul Walker example about that crazy Uncle Jimmy and the kids, and the kid happens to be heir to a colossal amount of money? How people want to think through that?
And so, the funny thing is, I always think about, we never know how much money we will be leaving. What we know is, I may feel like I got $1.50, right? And I unfortunately got hit by a Mack truck. And now, because my life is so valuable, that my loved ones are blessed with, $6 million, right? And tons of people are going to volunteer to take care of your child. And what we know is, even sometimes our co-parent is the one who's identified to take care of our child. Now, I know all of y'all are happily married, you have spouses that are perfect, but I will say to you, that's not always the case. And so you may or may not want that co-parent to be the one who's going to make the decisions or have the benefit of your assets because you didn't make another plan. Right. So with that being said, I encourage you to make that plan, right? Plan for the best, plan for the best case scenario financially, but also knowing that you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. Right. And so put in position what you want to have happened. We have so many times that you may have the perfect spouse, but he's just not that good with money. And so planning someone else to be that financial person. The other thing that I say to folks is, now we do, with our estate planning, we do pool boy and bimbo clauses. So I am sure that when I pass away, Sister Sarah will cozy up to my good looking husband and say, I know that Amy's been taking care of you, but she gone, so I got you. Excuse me. So with that in mind, we want to make sure that the plan that I put in place, like the Pamela Sue Anderson experience, is still covered, right? That we still make sure that the plan that I have takes care of my husband, but he can't take care of her, right? And so that she can go do her own thing, but my husband is, and my children and our children together are indeed covered. So we get to make those plans accordingly.
Aimee,
All
I
right,
can ask
got
a
it.
question.
Okay, go for it.
Now that we're seeing more millennials purchase homes, Aimee, how do we encourage younger people to think about the estate planning well before they're ready to retire?
Well, again, one of the things that we encourage people to do is, one, have a financial advisor, right? Because we should have this. What we see with high net worth folks is that they have a team of people who support them in decision making financially. I say Black folks can create a movement out of anything. Let's create a movement on economic empowerment and strategic legacy building. Right. I know that we are at our firm, we have this Millennial Wealth Building conference every year. And unfortunately, we have to entice folks to come in because they don't really care about estate planning, but we get to slip it in. Right. And so what I want people to realize is that estate planning is a part of financial planning. Right. And what we know is when we buy a house, it's as important to keep it as it is to get it. Right. But we've got to think about that and talk about that as the holistic financial planning component.
Thank you. And I like that conference idea. We have got to get the word out on that. Herman, back over to you.
Okay, so one has come through. How long should it take to close out an estate about? And if there's a range?
Close out a probate estate can be years, typically 2 to 3 years. Right. Yeah.
Oh my word.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
We also have an online attendee question. How much time should I anticipate it taking to set up an estate? Weeks or months?
So the answer is, I'm a lawyer, and the answer is always it depends. We are months, and because what we know is if you're really creating a strategic plan, that one, we want it to resonate with you, and we are pretty comprehensive in how we look and think about it. So typically it's a couple months. Again, and also depends on the complexity of the plan. If you have when we work with 18-year-olds, it's pretty fast. It doesn't even take a month. But if we're talking about people who have children, one of the things that we do with our children is we create child development plans for minor children. So identifying if you are not here to be able to be there, what is the action plan that we have for your kids, right? What are the priorities and the values that we want to instill upon them as they move forward, right, without you? So there are a couple of things that we do that really requires thoughtfulness. And especially when there's two parents, we need to have agreement. And sometimes that's a whole lot of work too.
Okay, I have one. What is the time limit to contest a will?
It depends on the state. And so it's typically, it can be 6 months, typically. A roundabout, but again, but let me just share with you also that contesting a will is significant. So, so make sure, I mean, we've done it and we've been successful, but in the cases that we've been successful, they're pretty like blatant crazy. So, but if we talk about undue influence, if we talk about somebody who doesn't have capacity to create a will, and understanding that capacity is different for testamentary purposes. So in testamentary purposes, to create competency means that I understand and know who my heirs are, and I understand the assets that I have. You don't need to know, the great complexities, but if you can truly identify who your heirs are and what your assets are, you have the competency to establish a will or an estate plan.
We have a couple more questions coming in from online. First one, what is the average cost to begin estate planning?
So I love the concept of a beginning. So that's a whole thing. So it should be, again, and it depends on what you get, right? So if you get a foundational will plan, and I will tell you sort of our frame of reference, it's under $2,000 for that foundational plan. But the complex plans can be $20,000. and we do a flat fee, right? So it's a flat fee based on the services that you get. It is, we're not saying just because you're wealthy, you have to pay more. We don't do that. It is, but we do a flat fee because we want to make sure that you are really understanding we don't want you to say, I don't want to call her because it's going to cost me more money to call her. We want to make sure that you understand and appreciate everything that's there. And again, that answer is for our firm. Other people, it's are different. Other people, have different rates and rate structures.
And I think you may have answered this one, but I'll go ahead and read it in case you have anything to add. Should I expect to pay the estate planner a flat fee or an hourly rate?
Let me suggest that you go, there are people who do both. I suggest that you go with a flat fee. And the other question, the point that I want to identify is, right now there is this whole rush of non-lawyers doing these like business trusts. When I've seen them, I've had a number of clients who had them and they are not good. And they're actually much more expensive than we do. But know that there is this huge onslaught of businesses creating these trusts without legal expertise involved. Now, I'm not judging. Just know that what you're getting, because now there's a whole lot of online estate plannings where you can say that, I can do it yourself. And that is I'm not going to say that it's bad. I'm saying that you're not getting any legal advice. And there are times in which you don't know what you're going to avoid. You don't know what you're going to get when you're walking through. And unfortunately, what happens is you won't know until it's too late. Right. So that's part of the struggle. We've had a number of people walk into our office with Susie Orman trust kits. And then they realize, okay, well, I had questions about this, but Susie Orman's not a lawyer. So she wasn't able to give that advice.
So Aimee,
okay,
go ahead. Eric.
Oh, pardon me. Yeah, we just have not a question, but a comment from an online attendee. She says this was excellent. We, as the AA community, need to do better than the 30% you referenced, including myself. I will be in touch. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Before anybody leaves, I want to make sure that you hit the link and make sure you give us your feedback on the survey. Give us your email. There's a couple of slides here where we're going to highlight our future presentations throughout the year. We do that so that you know what's coming, when it's coming, so that you can be on the lookout for it. So now back to my question. So Aimee, as it relates to, you had a slide where you mentioned businesses. What kind of, I remember in one of our meetings, you talked about key man insurance and how businesses need to think about, how individuals should think about succession planning and putting the right protections in place so that the business does not go out of business because a key person or a key contributor passes and then there's infighting between the partners and the family member of the person dying. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So often, again, as we talk about the what we talk about is the struggle with not having that plan. So often it's one of those things where LegalZoom will download the operating agreement. So I'm in partnership with somebody who, we just have that LegalZoom plan. Now, if my partner died or got divorced, I may be in business with his ex. That's not a great place to be. So when we talk about the 5 Ds of business succession planning, we need to come up with that strategy so that we can avoid it. When we think about how do we pay for all these things, then there are resources that we plan for, that tools that we need to have. Because, for example, having that key man insurance that the company owns that can buy out the widow, because the widow comes in now, that's half my company. No. Not that she probably isn't a brilliant person, but if she's not a lawyer or a dentist or whatever it is that business is, or doesn't have your vision, that can just be a whole lot of disruption. And in addition, that same thing can happen if we are planning for, a divorce. We need to have all of those things factored in. Again, I tell people all the time, I'm a professional pessimist. My job is to look at what could go wrong and how do we mitigate it so that we don't feel the struggles of that.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Eric, you got any?
I am good to go on this end. Thank you for asking, Herman.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, I'm gonna take over for a little bit, Amy. Eric, can you go to the next slide, please? And if any other questions come on, let me know. So this is what I was mentioning when I said we're going to have future events. As you can see here, this is the one for February 16th. We're going to have a tax prep session on March 9th, another wills and estate planning, and this is specifically for businesses, on March 28th, student loan review by our very own Barry Coleman, foreclosure and eviction prevention, May 11th, an insurance overview. You know, insurance is full of jargon. You got this insurance, you got that insurance. What's the best insurance? Well, that depends on your unique situation. And so that's what we're going to have Eugene take us through there. Then we've got an in-person event in Greenville, South Carolina on the 14th. And then in July 27th, we're going to look at our small business folk and talk about how they can best utilize the Small Business Administration. And then we're going to follow that up with in September 21st, small business strategic planning. That's important. You know, you want to make sure that you prepare yourself for long-term success. The best way to do that is to plan. And then in November, in preparation for shopping season, we're going to have shopping responsibly by our very own Cora Fulmore. So there may be some additional sessions. I'm working to get a presentation by the CFPB, as well as some other organizations. U.S. Black Chambers is one. So I will keep updating this camera as those opportunities become available. Next slide, please. Okay, now, if you're interested, if you're representing an organization or you think your church or civic organization or somebody else might be interested in joining the Faith-Based Alliance for Financial Empowerment, please send me. I've given out my email. I'll give it out again. It's hpalmer@nfcc.org. Send me your organization's name, the contacts, your email, cell phone, and your address. You can send it to my email here or my colleague, Pam's email. Next slide, please. All right, these are some of the counseling resources. If you know someone who might be in need or has an issue, please don't, there's no reason. The worst thing you can do is need help and not get it, or know of somebody who needs help and not connect them with the resource that can help. We have certified counselors. So we're a nonprofit. We're not trying to make money. We're just trying to help you to get a better financial outcome. Here's a telephone number, and that's the link. Telephone number 833-691-6299, and the link www.nfcc.org/faith-based. And we'll connect you based upon what you're looking for. And here you see the different services provided: basic financial literacy, credit management, housing counseling. There's a number of items under housing counseling, student loan counseling, and bankruptcy counseling. Next slide, please. Wise counsel. And if we can't help you, we connect you with a number of other resources here. You see us there, but you also see Freddie Mac. LaTanya, I'm gonna hand this over to you so you can talk to the people about what you have to offer.
Thank you so much, Herman. We have our Credit Smart Essentials. If you need any money management information, any type of financial literacy information, we have that available to you for free online. And there's a way to track your progress. It is gamified. You will get badges. And if you are interested specifically in home buyer information, you can go to Freddie Mac Home Buyer U. If you need information on our refinance program, we have a link in My Home also for you. My Home is our consumer website portal. There are blogs there. There are free calculators. If you, when the time comes, are considering a refinance and you want to know whether or not it's beneficial for you, we have that information available to you. And the calculators will have you actually place your current mortgage with a potential new mortgage, and then you can determine if that is the best path for you. And next, we have Diversified Resource Network, the consumer page. I advise everyone to check that out. In addition, if you are looking for HUD counseling agencies, we have that addressed there for you. And we also have the Federal Trade Commission available. If you need to check your credit report, we advise that you go to annualcreditreport.com. And then we have CFPB, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That is available for you, and there's a wealth of knowledge there. Please seek wise counsel. Thank you so much, Herman, and I'm going to turn it back to you for the next slide.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, so here we go. These are some additional resources, and please make note, this is beware of scams, protection for older adults, Fannie Mae. The very fact that we have a Fannie Mae link when we've got LaTanya, who works for Freddie Mac, one might say a competitor. We're not in this for gain. We're in this to share information. These are vetted resources. They are certified, and they are here to help you achieve better financial outcomes.
And Herman,
yes.
I know I'm about to tell your business, but you and I both actually served at Fannie Mae for a period of time. So I am happy to say that the government-sponsored enterprises, we work towards equity in housing. So thank you so much for that comment.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And you said it so eloquently. Ooh. All right, next slide, please. All right, these are some more of our resources. We're going to pass that. We got this different ways you can connect with the NFCC. Next slide, please. And I want to thank you. Thank you. Before I say anything else, please, again, hit that link, take the survey, let us know what you think. Are there any other questions for the wonderful Aimee? Okay. Once again, this evening's presentation was made possible by funding support provided by Freddie Mac, the Wells Fargo Foundation, and TD Bank. If you'd like to review the recording of tonight's presentation or presentation materials or more information, please be sure to complete the brief survey that I begged you to take. And you can access it through the link. You can access it through the link in the Q&A box. And Eric, you got that there. Thank you very much. I want to thank our presenter, Aimee Griffin, our director and producer, Eric Brandt, producers Joe Eves and Alice Sweeney, who helped back scenes, my colleagues and co-hosts, LaTanya Gonzalez, Barry Coleman, Cora Fulmore, Pam Peterson, Pastor Cedric Jones, Associate Pastor Kevin Murphy, and you, our amazing audience. I thank you so much for taking time to join us. I'm going to offer my co-host. Is there anything you want to say in closing? Don't be shy.
I think are you talking to me, Herman? Because I think we are ready to. So hold up, wait 1 second. Asking a quick question. My 33-year-old son, be a first-time home buyer with interest rates as high as they are. Do you advise purchasing now or waiting?
I would advise. May I answer that, Eric?
You go for it.
I would advise that 33-year-old sit down with a HUD-approved housing counselor to determine their specific individual needs. While we look at home ownership and rising interest rates, let's keep in mind that rental costs are also rising. So as we look at building wealth, we have to determine when we should get into the market so that we can start building wealth. Herman and I have talked about this, and I'm not going to say that interest rates do not matter, but I want you to know that rental costs are going up, and homeowners' median wealth is 89 times higher than that of a renter. So when you keep things like that in mind, you have to make a determination that perhaps I should get into a starter home and not break out like Bootsy on that first house. I may want to get into a condo or a co-op and then build some equity and then move that up into perhaps my forever home. So as I said in the beginning, I would advise to meet with a counselor, because Each and every one of our circumstances are different. Just like estate planning, our home ownership journey is also different. Herman, I know you have something to say on this.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So here's the thing. Buying a home is very complicated. And unless you do this all day, every day, it's like going into a different country where they speak a different language. There's a whole lot of jargon, and it all has implications for your pocketbook. The thing that a housing counselor can do is they know the system. They can advocate for you. They know where there's money, especially for you first-time home buyers. There's down payment assistance programs where in some instances, it's based on your income. It's based upon where you're buying. It's based upon your occupation. I've heard of situations where people have gone to market with various down payment assistance programs, and they layer them, which means they stack them. You might get 10,000 from this resource, 17,000 from that, 30,000 from that. That might be a town like Raleigh, Durham. And what happens is every time you get down payment assistance, that reduces the monthly nut that you have to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And in some instances, you can do it such a point where you actually wind up paying less in your mortgage than you would pay in rent. And you have more security, assuming you have a fixed rate mortgage. Guess what? When your rent goes up every year, every other year, every third year, you got a fixed rate mortgage, that's going to be fairly consistent. So you got an advantage to owning a home. And you're building equity, and you got a tax deduction. And if you want to paint your walls purple with pink polka dots, you can because it's yours. So make sure you understand the benefits of counseling, because I'm telling you, they can make that slope that you have to climb a lot less steep. I'm kind of passionate about counseling.
I was going to say, I thought you might have had something to say about this topic.
Just a little bit. Cool. Cora, you want to talk about something?
Just want to echo what everybody.
Oh, you're on mute, Cora.
Thank you so much. Just want to echo what others have said about Aimee. The presentation was excellent. We all got a lot. I was able to sneak in a question, and thank you. My husband was sitting right here as it was read and you shared. So thank you. I appreciate it. And hope all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right. Well, I truly want to thank you. Thank you for joining us. We hope to see you at our next event. And again, sign in to the and get the information from this presentation so that you'll be up to date and up to speed on all what's coming down the pipe. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. We appreciate you. Take care.